Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining. Well, in this video, we'll be taking a look at the Breach and Clear artefact mod. Now, there's an awful lot to talk about here, and there are 10 weapon combinations tested, making this an extremely long video. So I've broken it up into as many chapters as possible, so you can move around the video and watch the parts that interest you most. However, if you do skip, I strongly advise to watch the testing methods chapter first, as that will explain some things happening later into the video that might not make sense otherwise. So very quickly, let's summarise what this mod does. It's found in the Season 14 artefact. In the final column is a class item mod and requires 9 energy. When equipped, using any grenade launcher to damage a boss, champion, or breaking the shield of, I believe, any enemy type, will apply a 30% debuff to that target for 10 seconds, and also reload any stowed weapons. The reload and stowed weapons function only works on debuff activation, so for example, firing a grenade launcher at the same target with the debuff still active, say with 4 seconds left, will not reload anything, and it will also not reset the timer back to 10. Thankfully though, you can see how long is left on the left hand side of the screen. The target will glow a little while the debuff is active, and all rounds fired, whether they're crit shots or not, will be yellow. So there's plenty of visual cues to indicate whether it's active or not. And for anyone who's wondering and doesn't already know, yes, Anarchy and Witherhoard do activate this debuff as well, with Anarchy doing a little something extra that I'll talk about in a moment. So what are we testing? In no particular order, it will be the Lament, Whisper of the Worm, Xenophage with Axiom Warwicks, these first 3 all being with a lightweight frame grenade launcher, Cloudstrike, this has been paired with a heavy grenade launcher, Fallen Guillotine with Jagged Edge, Swordmaster's Guard, Whirlwind Blade and is also masterworked. Now, I know Steel Sibyl has slightly better DPS, but every time I see someone using a sword in game, if it's not the Lament, it's Fallen Guillotine. So I've chosen this to be as relevant to as many players as possible. I know there are also 3 class specific swords, but they'll be in their own separate video, and I'm still working towards god rolls for them. Moving on, there'll be Threaded Needle with Rapid Hit and Frenzy, Duello with Impact Casing, Impulse Amplifier and Frenzy. Those first 3 heavy legendaries have all been paired with Witherhoard. And for the final 3, it will be first in last out with Anarchy. The shotgun has Assault Mag, Auto Loading Holster and Vorpal Weapon. Then double Slugs in Anarchy, this will be using the same first in last out, and also Heritage with Tactical Mag and Reconstruction. No recombination here unfortunately, but it won't make a big difference. And finally, Praedyth Revenge with Anarchy. The perks in this sniper are Tactical Mag, Rewind Rounds and High Impact Reserves. Now, I'd like to say a quick but huge thank you to Widower. He's a regular viewer on the channel and very kindly let me jump on his account to test this. So a massive thank you to him. So now, testing methods. This is the section where I'll declare anything that later into the video might raise questions. Firstly, this mod only works when using a grenade launcher against bosses, champions and when breaking an enemy's shield. Carl, who I normally test against, isn't a boss and neither does he have a shield, so the mod and its abilities cannot be properly tested in that lost sector. But there is another lost sector on Nessus, so almost literally around the corner in Artifact's Edge, that has a Vex Minotaur with a shield. So still a major, but the debuff can be activated when breaking its shield. This did create a problem though. I couldn't break a shield with Anarchy or Witherhoard unless it was almost completely depleted, which I wasn't able to do when testing timings, as halfway through the test I'd need to pull out a primary and use that, which of course would completely invalidate any numbers. To get around this, for some testing clips you'll see me using Truthteller in place of Witherhoard, as that would break his shield. But the final damage numbers have been measured using just Witherhoard tick damage. It's when testing timings that I haven't used it, and you might see this with a few examples. Another thing, because I need the Minotaur to stay alive and have a fully replenished shield for when I proc the debuff a second time around, I'm not actually firing the main weapon at the Minotaur, as that would kill it or stop its shield from replenishing. For some timing tests, I've done some editing and stitched a few different clips together, which I'll highlight when I get to them, so for those moments, try not to pay attention to the number of rounds in the magazine or reserves. I will, however, put a counter on the screen so you can see how many have been fired. As always, any legendary weapons had a major spec, one loader mod for each weapon type was used and no mods to boost reserves. And finally, this Vex Minotaur actually has the exact same damage numbers as Karl, so you'll see that most of the damage clips are against that. I have double checked the base numbers against Karl for most weapons and everything checks out. So now for a quick look at the damage for the grenade launchers I'll be using, all slightly higher than normal due to the debuff. Starting with Witherhoard, this impacts for 1380 and ticks 17 times at 7070 over a period of roughly 10 seconds. This means total damage for a full Witherhoard round is 121,571. For all tests, I only fire one round at the target. For Anarchy, this impacts for 978, ticks 20 times at 6,818 for approximately 10 seconds and then detonates for 4,849. Therefore, total damage for a single Anarchy round is 142,187. Of course, with this, you can stack up to 2 rounds, so those numbers will, for the most part, be doubled. The interesting thing with this weapon is the debuff activates upon impact of the first round, and therefore before the second round hits. This means the debuff ends at the same time tick damage for the first round does, but when the second round then detonates, it reactivates Breach and Clear without you having to do anything, as demonstrated on screen now. Moving on to Truthteller, this was paired with the heavy weapon exotics. It did 32,895 damage per round. Now, this does have spike grenades and the energy matched the shield type, but honestly, don't get too caught up on the damage. Think of this as just a tool to activate Breach and Clear, a gateway to increase damage and reloaded weapons. Really, don't worry too much about the perks, and it could be any lightweight frame, just make sure you have auto load and holster on it. And finally, Blast but Chew. This was paired with Cloudstrike only and did 36,420 damage. As with Truthteller, don't worry about the perks, as this also is just a tool to activate Breach and Clear. Use any grenade launcher that you want, and if it's heavy, it doesn't even need auto load and holster, as they tend to hold a minimum of 5 or 6 in the magazine. Now, time for the actual testing, discussing the weapons in order of DPS, lowest to highest. So at number 10, and therefore last, it's Whisper of the Worm. With Breach and Clear activated, this did 53,207 per round, and with no debuff it was 40,989. All numbers are with Whisper Breathing procced. As you'll see in a moment, around 10 rounds could be fired within the 10-second window, while there was 8 outside of that. This means total damage from Whisper was 859,982. It was paired with Truthteller, which did 32,895. The method tested was to fire a round from Truthteller, switch to Whisper, wait for Whisper Breathing, and then fire all rounds. Even after the debuff ends, I just kept going. If you switch back to the grenade launcher to reactivate Breach and Clear, upon returning to Whisper, you'd ideally need to wait for Whisper Breathing to proc again, which is why I just kept going. Total time for this taken 16.53 seconds, therefore DPS was 54,016. Now this is lower than Whisper of the Worm on its own, at least it is when you proc Whisper Breathing prior to a damage phase starting, which is the problem with this example and perk. I'm starting the timer from the moment the grenade launcher is fired, meaning there's no way to avoid the Whisper Breathing proc time. This massively lowers DPS and reduces the number of rounds you can fire within the 10-second debuff window. Total damage is higher though, of course. In 9th place, it's Xenophage with Actium Warrigs. With the debuff active, damage per round was 28,856. I haven't tested the base damage as every round is fired with Breach and Clear activated. I was able to hold 28 rounds in total, therefore overall damage from Xenophage was 807,968. This weapon was also paired with Truthteller, which, as mentioned, was dealing 32,895 damage per round, of which 2 were fired in this test. This means total damage for both weapons was 873,758. The method was nice and simple with this one, just fire until the debuff ends, switch back to Truthteller for the second round, and then back to Xenophage to empty all in reserves. For me, I was able to fire 20 rounds during the debuff period and the remaining 8 after reactivating it. If you're on a Warlock or Hunter, then you will need to reload in some way, so to give Xenophage a fighting chance, I've only tested it on a Titan. Total time for this came in at 15.78 seconds, therefore DPS was 55,371. Now in 8th place, it's Cloudstrike. So with how awkward this weapon can be to test with a variation of different numbers on screen to determine damage, I applied a 30% increase to all numbers from my exotic sniper video, and then came and landed a few precision shots on our Minotaur. I then cross-referenced the numbers on screen with the 30% increased base numbers, and all of the ones I could see were basically the same. In order to get through this quickly, as it's a long video, I won't be breaking down the damage per round of this weapon as much as I have done before. If you'd like to see that breakdown though, check out my exotic sniper DPS video. So total damage from Cloudstrike alone is 979,680, built up of 3 full magazines of 7, each doing 296,410, and a final magazine of 3, which did 90,449. Blast per chew was paired with this and 2 rounds of fire in total, so 72,840 overall. This means total damage for everything was 1,052,520. For timings, it actually worked out quite well. Start with a single round from Blast per chew, then switch to Cloudstrike and empty 2 magazines. Around this time, the buff was about to end, so without reloading Cloudstrike, I switched to the GL, fired another round from that, then back to the now reloaded sniper and fired the remaining rounds, which was 1 full magazine and 1 with just 3 rounds in. Total time was 18.05 seconds, and therefore DPS was 58,311. In 7th place, it's Duello. This did a huge 117,786 damage per round. Remember, that's with Impact, Casing and Frenzy. I could hold 7 rounds in total, so damage for Duello alone was 824,504. This was paired with Witherhoard, of which there were 2 rounds fired. So 1 round with all tick damage recorded, but for the second round, because I stopped testing once the final rocket from Duello impacted, this only has 1 impact and 11 ticks, which means damage inflicted by Witherhoard was 200,722, meaning total damage for this test came in at 1,025,226. For the timings, I started with Witherhoard and then simply just fired from Duello until the debuff ended. However, things didn't line up perfectly and I had to switch to the grenade launcher a little early. There wasn't enough time to fire another round, and if I reloaded the rocket launcher and then switched, it would have taken longer than doing what I am now, which is switching a little soon and waiting for the debuff to end. I did this after the 4th round and then returned to the rocket launcher loaded for me and ready to fire the remaining 3. Total time for this was 17.4 seconds, therefore DPS was 58,921. In 6th place, it's Threaded Needle with Witherhoard. Damage per round with the debuff and Frenzy was 69,493, and with just Frenzy on its own, 53,457. This had 20 rounds in total, of which 16 were with the buff and 4 without, making overall damage for Threaded Needle alone 1,325,716. This was paired with Witherhoard, and 2 rounds with full tick damage was possible, so overall damage for that was 243,142. Not breaking those numbers down as it's been done earlier in the video. With all this taken into consideration, total damage for this method was 1,568,858. For timings, start with a round from Witherhoard fired directly at the target and then empty 2 full magazines from Threaded Needle. Doing it this way does mean the final 2 rounds in the second magazine may fall outside of the debuff window, but for simplicity's sake I've allowed that to happen. Without reloading after the second mag, fired another round from Witherhoard and then switched back to Threaded Needle, ensuring Breaching Clear is activated first, so that the fusion rifle is loaded and ready. I then simply repeated what I just said, so empty all remaining rounds, which consists of 2 full mags, with the final 2 rounds falling outside of the debuff window. Total time for all of this was 24.4 seconds, and therefore DPS was 64,297. We're starting to see some very impressive numbers now. In 5th place, it's Praedyth's Revenge. So this was a very well rolled sniper with tactical mag, rewind rounds and high impact reserves. I'm not going to be discussing the numbers for each round due to high impact reserves, but I will put them on screen now. These are all with the debuff, as I fired no rounds outside of the Breaching Clear window, which is because the last round in the magazine without the debuff, so when high impact reserves is boosting the most, it's still less than the 7th round in the magazine with the debuff. For rewind rounds, I've gone with a pattern of 7, then returning 4, and that 4 returning 1, so 12 rounds in total can be fired without reloading. Now, I have a feeling this perk might be bugged, or there's something about it we don't understand yet and why it can be inconsistent. I've sometimes had 5 rounds returned after the 7 and 2 after the 4, yet I couldn't work out why in the short time testing. I even had a look at a couple of other YouTube channels that tested this, and ironically, without naming names, they made a claim in the commentary, yet what was on screen contradicted what they said. If I ever get this weapon with this perk for myself, I'll try and spend a few days trying to work out what's going on, assuming it's not bugged of course. So with 23 rounds in total, and taking into consideration what round in the mag is being fired and the damage it will do due to high impact reserves, Praedyth's Revenge had an overall damage output of 567,479. This consisted of a 12 round magazine, then 6 rounds but without emptying the mag, and then the final 7 rounds at the end. Anarchy had 1 full tick cycle for 2 rounds stacked, followed by a second pair of rounds, but it wasn't long into this second Anarchy cycle that the sniper ran out of ammo. So for that, there were 2 Anarchy impact values, 1 single tick and 5 doubled up. This means Anarchy damage came in at 361,303, and therefore for the whole test, total damage was 928,783. For the method, I started with 2 rounds from Anarchy, then switched to Praedyth and fired a total of 12 rounds without reloading, which is based on 7, then 4 followed by 1. I then reloaded and fired 6 rounds, which was just as the debuff ended. I didn't keep going here to benefit from high impact reserves because, as I've already said, the 7th round in the mag with the debuff does more damage than even the final round without the debuff. So after that 6th round, I switched to Anarchy for another 2 from that. This reloaded the sniper, so when I switched back, the final 5 rounds were loaded and ready. This taken me exactly 14 seconds, and I have edited some clips and stitched them together to demonstrate that. This means total DPS came in at 66,342. In 4th place, we have Falling Guillotine, which was paired with Witherhoard. Again, not breaking down the numbers too much here to save time, but I have a sword testing video from season 13 that you can check out for that. You just need to apply 30% to damage for the debuff. So a normal light attack with the debuff and Whirlwind Blade at ×5 does 29,690. A heavy attack with the same conditions does 111,336 damage. And the damage for the process of proccing Whirlwind Blade does 239,232. Falling Guillotine's total damage is based on 2 Whirlwind Blade procs, including a heavy attack for each, a further 2 heavy attacks, 16 light attacks with all damage bonuses, and 3 light attacks with Whirlwind Blade at ×5, but no debuff. Basically, I'm testing up to the 4th heavy attack, but there are 2 instances of proccing Whirlwind Blade due to a midway switch to Witherhoard. So, after that mouthful, Falling Guillotine damage came in at 1,244,693. For Witherhoard, I got 1 round with all ticks and a second with all but 3, or around 3. So damage for this is 221,932. Therefore, total damage for this whole test is 1,466,625. The method was relatively simple. I fired a round from Witherhoard, then switched to the sword and procced Whirlwind Blade. I then did 8 light attacks and a heavy, and for the very final part of the debuff, I just did 3 light attacks, switched to Witherhoard, and then back to Falling Guillotine. The reason for those 3 in the row was because sword energy doesn't recharge when stowed. So with those 3, when I come back to the sword, I could just start again with 5 light attacks, so a total of 8 now, followed by a heavy attack to proc Whirlwind Blade. Then finish off with 1 last cycle of 8 light attacks plus a heavy. Total time for this was 21.58 seconds, therefore DPS is 67,962. On to the top 3 now, and in 3rd place, it's the Lament. Paired with this was Truthteller. And I'm not breaking down the numbers into too much detail as the video is already going to be too long, but a fully charged heavy combination consisting of 3 charged light attacks and a heavy did 246,657 damage. A normal light attack with the debuff was 23,154, while without the debuff it was 17,811. Total damage for the sword alone was based on 4 heavy attack combos, 11 light attacks with the debuff and 1 light attack without it, bringing the total to 1,259,133. Add 2 rounds from Truthteller to that, and it increases to 1,324,923 for this weapons test. The method started with a round from Truthteller, then straight into a heavy attack combo with the sword. This was followed with 4 normal light attacks and then a final heavy combo. At this point, I did 4 more light attacks so sword energy had replenished enough for a heavy, but with the last strike falling outside of the debuff window. After those 4 light attacks, it was back to Truthteller for another round, before returning to the sword and straight in for a heavy attack combo, as I had enough energy from the 4 light attacks before switching. And then it was one final cycle of 4 light attacks followed by a charged heavy combo. Total time was 19.2 seconds, meaning DPS came in at 69,006. In second place, and upping the DPS benchmark even further, is first in last out with Anarchy. As already mentioned near the start of the video, this has Assault Mag, auto-loading holster and vorpal weapon. Damage per round was 54,558 with the debuff, and everything was fired within that breach and clear window. I could hold 16 rounds in total, so damage for the shotgun alone was 872,928. For Anarchy, there was 1 full cycle of tick damage from 2 rounds, and for the second pair of rounds, it came with 2 impact, 1 single tick, and roughly 7 ticks doubled up. This means damage for Anarchy was 388,574. Therefore, total damage for this test was 1,261,502. The method tested was to start with 2 rounds from Anarchy, then switch to first in last out and empty the magazine of 6. Once this happens, I just smashed the reload and fire keys and fired 1 for 1 while reloading, and for another 6, making 12 in total so far. Then it was back to Anarchy for 2 more rounds before returning to the now reloaded shotgun for the final 4 slugs. Total time for this was 14.72 seconds, meaning DPS was 85,700, which is incredible. But it gets even more insane when we use 2 shotguns, which leads very nicely onto first place. Double slugs in Anarchy. Damage for this was based off the same first in last out we've looked at, but with only 12 rounds, and also Heritage for 14 rounds, with the latter doing 49,814 per round. And in case you didn't watch the previous section, first in last out was 54,558 per round. All of these numbers are with the breach and clear debuff. This means during this test, first in last out did 654,696 damage, while Heritage did 697,396. The total damage from Anarchy was 1 full tick cycle from 2 rounds, followed by a second partial cycle consisting of 2 lots of impact, a single tick and 16 double ticks, which brought damage to around 511,288. This means total damage testing was a huge 1,863,381. The method started with 2 rounds from Anarchy, then hot swap between the shotguns until first in last out has depleted its magazine of 6. Then I fired 2 rounds from Heritage, followed by another pair of grenades from Anarchy, before switching back to the shotguns to hot swap for 6 rounds each again. That is it. I didn't go any further. Total time for this was 18.48 seconds. This method tested doesn't fire every round from each shotgun, but at this point, due to auto-loading holster and reconstruction, there are many different ways you can empty the last few rounds, so I didn't carry on as I was already at 18 seconds and it seemed a little trivial. You also don't need to rely on breach and clear to reload anything, as first in last out reloads while firing 2 rounds from Heritage, and the latter can start with 14 in the mag already. DPS is always going to be insane for this combo, and for my test with this method, it came in at 100,832, which, as well as being absolutely incredible, that's also a little overpowered personally. So with the 10 weapons all covered, coming onto the screen now is a table as usual, ranking them from best to worst DPS. Pause the video now if you want a little more time to look at this as we're moving on to the graph. Now, bringing them onto screen in the order they were tested. I'm not going to spend too much time here as most of the details have been covered and I've been talking for long enough already. So first it's Whisper the Worm, and it wasn't a great result. This weapon's perks are built around aiming down sights consistently and landing precision shots, and therefore delaying that time to proc Whispered Breathing doesn't do it any favours, although this is still better than Whisper when you include the delay to its Catalyst perk. Xenophage has done very well considering its ease of use, although DPS wouldn't be this good if tested on a Warlock or Hunter. It does manage to stay ahead of Whisper until around 11 seconds, but the switch into the grenade launcher pulls it back. This makes me wonder if it would be better off if you carried on firing all reserves without reactivating the debuff. Total damage wouldn't be as high, but DPS could be a little higher. Cloudstrike now, and in this test it's not at the top like usual, and the main reason for that is because the exotics don't have a damage over time weapon like the legendaries do. So while DPS is actually really good, it's not enough to be at the top and stand out. It does however stay ahead of Whisper for almost the entire time tested, and is typically above Xenophage. Next up is Duello, which has DPS that may be a little higher than everything so far, but it doesn't really stand out. There are even moments after 10 seconds where it's falling behind Whisper of the Worm, mainly due to the time it takes to switch back to the grenade launcher. But around the 1 to 2 second mark, it does have the best burst DPS, although it's literally just for a second or two. Now it's Threaded Needle, and the first weapon to pass 60,000 DPS. It does go back and forth with Cloudstrike a little, but ultimately it does come out on top and with a huge amount more damage. It also comfortably stays ahead of every other weapon so far, with the exception of Duello in the first 7 seconds or so, and briefly at 15 seconds. As you'll see when it comes on the graph, there are a couple of short periods where it's ahead of the Lament. I personally think linear fusion rifles are in a really good and well balanced place at the moment. So, Praedyth's Revenge. Typical 140 RPM sniper, low total damage output, but what it does have, it can inflict fast. It plays leapfrog with Threaded Needle a little, but does stay ahead for a good length of time from the start up to around 9 seconds. After 5 seconds, it stays ahead of everything with the exception of Threaded Needle again, but it does fall behind briefly around 11 to 12 seconds. Despite that, there's something that draws me to linear fusion rifles over snipers, especially the fast firing ones. And now it's Falling Guillotine, and it just seems to mingle. It does gain an advantage around the mid-range, but switching to the grenade launcher causes it to lose any small lead that it had, and not really pull ahead again until after 15 seconds. It's still really good and has excellent total damage, it's just being compared to other weapons that are also really good. Not to mention, the scaling on the graph is quite high due to the upcoming double slug damage, so a lot of the differences between these are all shrunk down. But yeah, Falling Guillotine and Witherhoard is an excellent choice. And now for the final sword, the Lament. This has excellent overall DPS, it might not seem like it's pulling ahead, but when you compare it to Whisper, Xenophage, Duello even, it's very good, and still stays ahead of Threaded Needle and Falling Guillotine for the majority of the time. So far, nothing has stood out as significantly better, unless you want to compare the Lament to Whisper for example, but that is about to change. Coming onto the screen now is First In Last Out with Anarchy, and there's honestly not much to say. After 4 seconds it propels itself ahead of everything. It briefly touches with Praedyth around 6 seconds, but it quite literally is just a brief touch. Honestly, I can't analyse this anymore, it's just significantly better. I'd like to question at this point if slug shotguns are a little overpowered, but it is paired with Anarchy, and no other close range weapon is, such as swords. Falling Guillotine may be paired with Witherhoard, but that's not as good as Anarchy, so we can't really compare directly using this example if slug shotguns are OP or not. But of course, we've still got double slugs coming onto the screen now, and this combination takes things even further. It makes a single slug and Anarchy look average, and the latter of those makes everything else look average. Are slug shotguns overpowered? What's also interesting is, I can't even hot swap that well, and these numbers are based on me doing it. An exceptionally good player would have fired 12 rounds hot swapping in little more time than First In Last Out fires 6, yet you can see from the graph I've clearly taken a good amount of time longer. My inconsistency really shows with the second pair of rounds from Anarchy, I was actually faster doing that with 2 shotguns rather than 1, and it's cleared on the graph. And quickly, first in last out on its own appears to catch double slugs when firing its final 4 rounds, but that's just an anomaly I've spoken about in detail in my DPS behind the numbers video, so if you want to know what's going on there, take a look at that. So yeah, are slug shotguns overpowered? Should Bungie remove sprint cancelling from the game? Personally, I don't think they should, as it gives players something to practice and aim for that will benefit them for technically being a better player, at least where DPS is concerned. And it does have its drawbacks. Add clearing with 2 shotguns in Anarchy while trying to manage ammo for a boss fight can have problems. Without seeing slug shotguns compared directly to swords, as they're both close range weapons, without tick damaging weapons included, it's hard to say if slugs are overpowered. But, at least for my testing, specific to this video, I'd say they certainly are. Now, that is all from me. I'm now about to go lie down in a dark room for a few days and try to forget the words Breach and Clear, Debuff, Anarchy and Witherhoard, as this has been the most time consuming, frustrating, soul destroying, yet admittedly ambitious testing I've ever done. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe if you're not already, and give me any feedback in the comments down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.